Good evening and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Friday Symposium. Today is October 3rd, and as I often do if I have to pre-record, this is being pre-recorded in case something major happens between Thursday and Friday, and we don't mention it here in the program. But I will say the situation is, in a sense, could not be more turbulent. On the one hand, we have President Trump, who had a very successful meeting with the Russian President Putin in Alaska. But now, according to the Wall Street Journal, as of yesterday, the Trump administration has given Ukraine permission to use Tomahawk missiles and American intelligence, which for anyone who is sane knows this means that the US and the UK, who are the ones who have the codes to operate such missiles, are in effect directly in a war with Russia. This is completely insane and criminal if it is true. And that's part of the problem because we don't even know what's true. We don't know who is calling the shots, which for a nuclear superpower is quite problematic. We also have Trump and Netanyahu's announcement of a 20-point peace proposal, which on the one hand, everyone wants it to be successful because the slaughter being carried out by the Israeli Defense Forces against innocent civilians in Gaza, killing probably hundreds of thousands of people so far, starving them, bombing them, etc., is unbearable. On the other hand, this particular plan is very short-sighted. It presents the problem as if it is only Hamas and the attack of October 7th, and nothing criminal has happened afterwards, although they do usefully say that the United Nations should be the agency to deliver the aid. No mention of the fake Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which just turned into killing fields with 1/10 of the food that's actually needed. So we'll see. This can work, but only in a context where the entire world is in a new paradigm, and particularly the United States changes its relationship to the global South and goes with something like Lyndon LaRouche's OASIS plan for regional development. Finally, we had earlier this week this extremely bizarre spectacle of our Defense Secretary Hegseth calling in all these generals, admirals, people much higher military rank than he. Of course, he is the Secretary of Defense, to give them some kind of diatribe about not being woke. This was not strategic. He didn't call them one by one and say, look, could you clean up this area? Or I got a report about something going on in the troops under your command. Really bizarre in that we're going to have a warrior fighting force and then various references to being of the cloth. I'm sorry, we're not running the Crusades. You have freedom of religion in the United States. Hegseth, unfortunately, seems to have ties to the Temple Mount organization, which is a bunch of religious fundies who think we're going to bring in the Armageddon and the second coming of Christ. And if billions of people die in the process, I guess it's okay. It's God's will. It's bizarre. We don't need religious zealots in positions of power, particularly positions to make war. So we'll hear more of this, but I think it underscores the importance of the discussion we're about to have now with two of the historians of the LaRouche Organization, Christopher Sare, who is also my husband, and Robert Wesser. And Bob and I had discussed a few weeks ago that we wanted to do a series, given that we are entering the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence, of American history and some of the great leaders of our republic, and why, present their lives. There's a great deal that most people will not know because, unfortunately, most of the history books in the United States seem to be written by British companies. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chris and Bob.
Great. Thank you very much. So, yeah, Bob had this idea of doing a series on the great presidents. And the idea is the as I titled this, George Washington versus the Empire, since he is the first president of the United States, but also, as you'll see, more than that. I mean, the what he did in order to become the first president of the United States is also quite fascinating. And I think it's important because a lot of people have a very vague notion of Washington, if any at all. Well, very vague. I mean, yeah, he was the first president. I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the cherry tree. I mean, absolutely banal, stupid things that, American citizens need to find out what the issues were and who were the people that created this country. And you have to find out who George Washington is. And I highly recommend reading this biography of Washington by Ron Chernow. It's not perfect. It misses some essential things, but it is a very fair and respectful biography of this great man, Washington. So I want to just start with a bit of the facts around Washington. He was born in 1732. So just to give you a sense of this, Ben Franklin was born in 1706. So he's Ben Franklin is an intellect in the nation or in the colonies at this time, and his father, Augustine Washington, joined the Principio Iron Company that was founded out of Maryland, but he set up a iron mine and an iron production facility in Accokeek Creek in Northern Virginia. So this is in 1736. Washington's 4 years old, and his father sets up an iron company in Virginia. In 1748, the Ohio formed, and the Ohio Company was created. Actually, can you bring up the first slides? The Ohio Company is formed, and the idea of the Ohio Company is to go west, Ohio, or the Ohio River, and develop the interior. So far, the colonies are all along the coast. Washington, Spotswood, who was the governor, he was governor before Washington was born, but he had a concept of getting across the mountains and developing the interior of Virginia, which was huge. I mean, the Virginia went all the way to the Mississippi River at that point, to the west. So these are images of Washington, 16 years old. He's a surveyor for the Fairfax family, and there's an excellent book everybody should get, How the Nation Was Won by Graham Lowry, and it has a tremendous description of Spotswood, of the Fairfax family, how the Fairfaxes were steeped in the tradition of Jonathan Swift. They were opposed to the as Graham Lowry talks about, the Hellfire Clubs of London, the rotten empire system of the British Empire at that time. And Washington is a surveyor, and his job is to determine, what he determines is that the Fairfax proprietary goes to the west sufficiently enough to get them into the Mississippi Valley, basically, where the rivers start running to the west, with the idea of developing this area. And Washington begins to buy land in this area. and gets familiar with this area, as you can see, surveying, and you can go to the next slide, or actually I can go to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. So the Ohio Company, Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia is a major force in the Ohio Company. George Washington, Christopher Gist, and this painting here, this beautiful painting, you can see Washington is there. He's on the side there. Gist is in the center, and they're talking with Native Americans. And the idea is to create friendship with Native Americans, trade, have a cooperative partnership with them. Now, what they realize is that the French are moving in towards the colonies at this time, 1753, 54. And the French intend to basically block the colonies against the water, and potentially take over the whole area. And they have employed a number of the Indian tribes to work with them against the colonies. So this is a very delicate situation. They're out there gathering intelligence, trying to figure out what's going on. So they realize that there's something afoot, that the French are about to really make a move to the east. This is them on a raft going back home. So what Washington does now, first, let me just say before this, there's a couple of things that the British do. Now, first of all, remember Washington's father works with iron production. In 1750, the British create the Iron Act. They forbid the colonies from producing iron. In 1751, you have the Currency Act, where they forbid the colonies from having their own currency. So imagine at the age of 18, George Washington recognizes that, okay, the British don't want us to produce iron. They don't want us to have a sovereign currency. Duly noted. Okay. So these are the two things, right, that you want to remember throughout his life, that this must have had an impact on him from a very early age. So Washington is sent by Dinwiddie and basically picks a fight with the French. And this shot is the beginning of the French and Indian War. George Washington starts the French and Indian War and essentially forces the British hand to come in and defend the colonies from this French encroachment. And Washington, who becomes Colonel Washington at this point, let me see if I have I don't, let me go back here. Washington becomes Colonel Washington, and he learns, this is the beginning of his knowledge of how to fight wars. And he has a sense of how the French and the Indians fight. They don't fight by standard European, the troops line up here and the other troops line up here and they shoot, and whoever has some troops left wins, the standard European battle plans, etc. And the British are still completely steeped in this. So this is interesting too. This is 1754 is when Washington starts this conflict with the French and the Indians. At the same time, Benjamin Franklin founds or creates the Albany Convention, 1754, with this shirt, "Join or Die." And you can see here now Washington sets up a militia in Pennsylvania with the idea of going to fight the French on behalf of the American colonies. And you can see with this snake here, "Join or Die." It's his message to the colonies. if you only think about yourselves, if you stay separate, if you don't join, you are as dead as this snake in the picture. Okay. So this is also Washington this is who he's working with at the time. This is the thinking at the time of the Patriots. So the British win the French and Indian War. What do? They create this proclamation line, and you can see the map here. And so you can see how Virginia, like I'm saying, right, goes all the way west. Okay, not anymore. They put this line in, and they say that's where the colonists can stay. The rest is a reserve for the Indians. And the British, of course, will try to use the Indians against the colonists, create tensions, create hatred, make sure that there is no cooperation. Typical British gang counter gang, pit these two people against each other and watch them fight and control control the whole thing. So that's what they do in 1763. Okay, so Washington, first of all, in the first battle, the first major battle with the British in 1755, General Braddock comes in, and Washington is trying to tell Braddock, don't fight the way you normally fight. You don't, I've been out here. I've been watching how these guys fight. They will come from out of trees. They will come around you. They will surround you. Don't just line up like an idiot. And Braddock lines up like an idiot, and he's killed. And it's a total rout. Washington miraculously lives. And there's a famous story of an Indian who had Washington in his sights and didn't shoot. And later on, he tells Washington about that. But Washington miraculously survives for his mission in the future. So I just want to just say that he wants recognition for his military knowledge. Won't get it. Not from the British. Treated like a second-class citizen. That's in his mind also. So he goes back to Mount Vernon, and he develops scientific farming. He's not just what he realizes is that, first of all, tobacco is a terrible crop. If you just grow tobacco, it will destroy your fields. It just destroys everything. It takes the nutrients out. And of course, the British only want Virginia, Carolinas, etc., to produce tobacco. They want a slave system, plantation system, producing tobacco. That's what they want. They don't want iron. They don't want industry. They want this backwardness. Washington realizes that. He says, first of all, I'm getting crap prices for my tobacco more and more. I'm buying finished goods from Great Britain, and the goods are becoming more and more expensive. So what he does is he shifts. He says, I'm not going to grow tobacco anymore. I'm going to grow corn and wheat and all kinds of other, many other crops. And that's what he does. And he begins to get a sense of how this British free trade system works. It's totally destructive to the colonies. So he gets that. Now, fast forward a bit. He's becoming more and more revolutionary, a deeper concept of the evil of the British Empire and how it works. And he and George Mason in Williamsburg, they pass the Fairfax Resolves, 1774. And I just want to read to you just a few sections from the Fairfax Resolves. This is 1774, 2 years before the Declaration of Independence. Resolved that the most important and valuable part of the British Constitution, upon its very existence depends, is the fundamental principle of the peoples being governed by no laws to which they have not given their consent, by representatives freely chosen by themselves, who are affected by the laws they enact equally with their constituents to whom they are accountable, and whose burdens they share, in which consists the safety and happiness of the community. Okay, so that is asserted. And so you already have a sense here that they don't exactly respect the all-powerful King of England. Furthermore, they go on to say, resolved. Now, this is after the Tea Party, right, in Massachusetts. So, and they're outraged by what happened there. Resolved that we will cordially join with our friends and brethren of this and other colonies in such measures as shall be judged most effectual for procuring redress of our grievances, and that upon obtaining such redress, if the destruction of the tea at Boston be regarded as an invasion of private property, we shall be willing to contribute towards paying the East India Company the value. But as we consider the said company as the tools and instrument of oppression in the hands of government and the cause of our present distress, it is the opinion of this meeting that the people of the colonies should forbear all further dealings with them by refusing to purchase their merchandise until that peace, safety, and good order which they have disturbed be perfectly restored. Men of fortunes to set examples of temperance, fortitude, frugality, and industry, and give every encouragement in their power, particularly by subscriptions and premiums, shall contribute to the improvement of arts and manufactures in America. Not in the colonies, but in America. Just to point out, the great care and attention should be had to the cultivation of flax, cotton, and other materials for manufactures. And we recommend it to such of the inhabitants who have large stocks of sheep to sell to their neighbors at a moderate price. Sell to your neighbors. Resolved, that is the opinion of this meeting, that the merchants and vendors of goods and merchandise within this colony should take an oath not to sell or dispose of any goods or merchandise whatsoever, which may be shipped from Great Britain after the 1st day of September next as aforesaid, except the articles being accepted, and that they will, upon receipt of such prohibited goods, either send the same back again by the first opportunity, or deliver them to the committees in the respective counties to be deposited in some warehouse. And number 17, resolve that it is the opinion of this meeting that during our present difficulties and distress, no slaves ought to be imported into any of the British colonies on this continent. And we take this opportunity of declaring our most earnest wishes to see an entire stop forever put to such wicked and a wicked, cruel, and unnatural trade. Okay, so that's 1774, pretty powerful. The next year, George Washington takes control of the Continental Army. Now, this is very important because he goes to Boston, and obviously, this is in the summer of 1775. So prior to that, you've had the battles of Lexington and Concord. There's already been engagement with the British, but there's no Continental Army. So what Washington does is it's very important, first of all, that he's from Virginia going up to Massachusetts. And they spend most of the time he spends is trying to keep this army together, bringing people in. Dan Morgan shows up with his sharpshooters, and they're running around and firing off their weapons, and he brings the whole thing into order. And they don't have, they hardly have any ammunition. He has to bluff so that the British don't find out so that the British think that they have more ammunition. At the same time, because he's bluffing and saying he's got this amount of ammunition, the people from the colonies, people down in the Continental Congress, they're saying, why aren't you attacking? He can't attack because he doesn't have the weaponry to attack, but he can't let the British know it. This is what he's dealing with. I mean, it's amazing what he goes through from the beginning here in 1775. The psychological, torment that he goes through along with other kinds of torments. So what happens here? I don't want to go into a lot of the history of the American Revolution because that's a huge discussion in of itself. But importantly, he sends Henry Knox up to Ticonderoga on an amazing mission in the winter 75 into 76. And Knox goes to Ticonderoga and grabs all of the British cannons, etc., and brings them back on sleds pulled by oxen over the Berkshire Mountains all the way into Boston. And so you have this famous battle, a battle that never becomes a battle, where they basically bring, the Battle of Dorchester Heights. They take these cannons, etc., and the British have all of their ships in the harbor in Boston, and so they bring these cannons up to Dorchester Heights in the middle of the night, one night, and the weather's fine. And then when they wake up in the morning, it's a terrible storm comes in, and they're not able to fire on the British. But the British, seeing this, basically they pull out. They go up to Nova Scotia, etc. Washington doesn't know exactly where they're going to go, but he surmises that they're going to go to New York, which they do. And they come down around to New York, and Washington is in New York. When the British leave, he brings all of his troops down to New York, and it's in the summer of 1776 that the troops are there, and the Continental Congress declares independence from the British Empire in 1776, July 4th. Washington reads this Declaration of Independence to his troops in New York City. And they get a little wild, and they go and they tear down a statue of King George III, and they drag it up to Litchfield, Connecticut, and melt it down and make bullets out of it, lead bullets. And Washington can't agree with that kind of insubordination and wildness, but anyway, a series of losses occur, one after the next. The Battle of Long Island, or the Battle of Brooklyn, Battle of White Plains. There's a few places where, he's able to push back a bit, but basically he is retreating, and he develops this idea of a strategic retreat because the British have what they have. I mean, and they're going to send more ships over, but essentially they're going to have what they have, and they're there. And the American military, Washington has what he has, and he doesn't even have what he has because half the time these guys are leaving. They're either their year is up, their time is up. He can't get pay for them. He's constantly battling with the Continental Congress. Look, we need money for these troops. We need to get them something a little extra just to convince them to stay for another month so we can fight this next battle. This is what he's dealing with all the time. So he's dealing with the states' rights nonsense. There's no central government. There's no concept of the entire nation coming together. He's trying to pull the entire nation together to win this revolution against the British Empire. So so he retreats. We know, people know about the strategic retreat he makes to Pennsylvania, and the very famous Battle of Christmas Day of 1776, when Washington, and it's interesting because, there's at least 8%, according to Chernow, 8% of the soldiers in the American army are African Americans. And you see this with Glover's forces, Glover and the Marblehead men who managed to get all of these ships across the Delaware, all these boats across the Delaware, for this surprise attack on the Hessians at Trenton. And this is a major turning point because you've had nothing but losses until then. This is the period that Tom Paine is writing the crisis papers. These are the times that try men's souls. The Summer Soldier and Sunshine Patriot will quickly, and this is who's rallying the troops. So we have this tremendous victory that Washington lays out. Fast forward to Valley Forge. Again, tremendous suffering. It's a tremendously cold winter. Troops don't have shoes. There's a number of battles that have gone on, not victories, not complete losses, not victories. But he's dealing with the fact, again, that Congress won't get him money. And what he's seeing is that farmers all around are selling their food to the British in Philadelphia and other places because the British are paying the price. So he's there and the troops are there fighting for the independence of this nation. And a huge number of people in the colonies are not only not fighting, but they're getting food to the enemy because they're looking out for themselves. So this is a hell of a thing. It's not like everybody was in favor of the American Revolution or was wholeheartedly sacrificing to make sure that it was successful. So much of the revolution shifts to the south after the Battle of Freehold in New Jersey, 1778. And so Washington at this point, he's still up in the north, but you have a number of battles in the south, some victorious, some not. But at this point, you have the battle of the victory in Bob, help me out here, which brings the French in.
Saratoga.
Battle of Saratoga, which brings the French in. And Washington is then basically trying to figure out how much are the French going to work with us? How much are they going to fight? Where's their navy going to show up next? This kind of thing. But essentially, they meet in Yorktown, and Washington sees the potential to pin the British, to pin Cornwallis. The British Navy leaves, Cornwallis there, and at the same and immediately then the French Navy comes in, and they're able to win a victory. And Hamilton plays an actual military role in this. He had been involved in cannons and artillery and things of that nature. In this case, he actually leads an attack on a redoubt, and the British are soundly defeated. And you can see here, this is Washington before the battle, going into the Battle of Yorktown, and then this is the famous painting of Cornwallis surrendering. So this is really important. In 1783, Washington resigns his commission. Now, I will point out, before this, he's up in Newburgh, and it's going, the British have surrendered, but the question is this a trick? Are they going to come back and start to fight again? Who knows? So Washington is keeping his army together through this whole period. At the same time, he goes up to the Mohawk River Valley in upstate New York, and he starts to look at the potential for building canals and internal improvements up there. Just of note. So he resigns his commission in 1783. And even King George III is amazed at this, because he's a general. He's got all the power right now, and instead of usurping it and saying, "I'm now king," I am the law, he resigns his commission to the government, to the elected representatives of the Continental Congress, and goes back to his plantation on the Potomac. And what he immediately becomes involved in is again this question of internal improvements. And it's very important. The question of internal improvements, you're going to see, is essential to this whole issue of so-called states' rights and a strong central government. He becomes the president of the Potomac Canal Company in 1785. And you can see they build a series of locks around falls. This is, I think, Great Falls on the Potomac River. And so this is his obsession. In fact, Elkanah Watson comes down in 1785 and spends a weekend with Washington at Mount Vernon. And he says, it's complete canal mania. He said, I came down to talk with him about ending slavery. And all he wants to talk about is canals. Now, of course, Elkanah Washington is totally involved and totally interested in canals as well. He's one of the people pushing for the Erie Canal early on. But this is what Washington was thinking about, was the internal improvements of the nation. Now, right prior to that, 1785, just to give you a sense of how Washington is thinking, he writes a letter to Benjamin Harrison, who was the governor of Virginia at the time. And he says, the disinclination of the individual states to yield competent powers to Congress for the federal government, their unreasonable jealousy of that body and of one another, and the disposition which seems to pervade each of being all wise and all powerful within itself, will, if there is not a change in the system, be our downfall as a nation. This is as clear to me as the ABC. And I think we have opposed Great Britain and have arrived at the present state of peace and independency to very little purpose, if we cannot conquer our own prejudices. The powers of Europe begin to see this, and our newly acquired friends, the British, are already professedly acting upon this ground, and wisely too, if we are determined to preserve in our folly. He also talks about, he writes a letter to Harrison about the need to build these canals and the internal improvements to link up the West to the East, because he says otherwise these people that have gone West, I believe he says, like the touch of a feather, they will be gobbled up by the Spaniards, by other empires. So we've got to bind the nation together with internal improvements. And at that point, we don't have railroads, so canals are the key thing, which Benjamin Franklin has been totally involved with. He was over in England studying canals. Schuyler, General Schuyler, had spent time in the 1760s in England studying the canals. Elkanah Watson, who had come down to talk to Franklin, he was over in Europe actually working with Franklin, and he took a tour all throughout Europe, the Netherlands, England, studying the canals, how they're built. So this is what is on the mind of these patriots that just won the revolution against the British Empire. This is what's on George Washington's mind. What Washington realizes with pushing for the Potomac Canal is the essential problem. Maryland and Virginia are fighting each other over who is going to get the most benefit out of the canal and the Potomac River. Maryland argues that they're going to lose trade and economic power, because then that whole Chesapeake Bay is going to be taken away from, and Virginia will. And it's so ridiculous because this canal is going to serve both Maryland and Virginia, right? Okay, so Hamilton organizes the Annapolis Convention of 1786 around it, around this idea of the canals and the general welfare of the colonies. Only 5 states show up at the Annapolis Convention in 1786. Is Washington daunted by that? Is he depressed? No. He seizes the opportunity and he says, okay, this is not what I wanted, but May of next year, we are going to have another convention, and it's going to be in Philadelphia, and it's going to be a constitutional convention. Okay, so fast forward, the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia of 1787. The idea is that these guys are going to get together and rework the Articles of Confederation. Absolutely not. Washington, Franklin, all these guys, they know that is a complete fool's errand. They're going to create an entire new constitution. They're not rewriting anything. They're creating an entirely new constitution that's going to either pull this nation together or it's all over. Might as well kiss it goodbye. And that's what they do. And Washington is the head of this convention. He's elected to be the head of the Constitutional Convention. He says very little in the convention. Other people say a lot. Other people wax eloquently. There's all kinds of different plans. He weighs in at critical moments in terms of what he thinks is a good idea. And they come up with this amazing document, the Constitution of the United States, which, you know, you think about it, there's a lot of, first of all, the fact that he walked away from power when he resigned his commission in 1783 created the conditions where he was able to be the head of this Constitutional Convention, and people weren't afraid that he was going to become the next king, the next dictator, grab the power, the next usurper. So he was in a unique position to do this because he was a uniquely moral person with his flaws. With his flaws, everybody had flaws. We all have flaws. But this guy had unique moral capabilities that allowed him, because of how he had governed himself, that allowed him to be the head of the Constitutional Convention. Now, ironically, at the end of it, George Mason, who had written this Fairfax thing, Mason walks out. He says, I smell a rat. They're grabbing national power, you know, and it's this thing that you get from these southern states. You know, if they have this power to do this and that, they have the power to take our slaves away, you know, and that's the constant refrain. So you see a shrinking of many people. Madison shrinks later, but he doesn't shrink at this point. He's involved in this Constitutional Convention, you know, totally involved and totally in agreement with Washington on the question of a strong central government, as is Hamilton, as of course is Ben Franklin. And the famous story of when Franklin sees the sun, either the sun on the back of a chair, and he goes, well, you know, at first when I got here in May, I didn't know whether the sun was rising or setting, but now I know it's rising in September. He says, now I know it's rising. And they sign this Constitution. Then they have to get it ratified by 9 states, and in order for it to come into existence. And that's a huge fight. And Washington's involved with that in Virginia. And of course, you know, the Federalist Papers, Hamilton, Jay, Madison, they're writing the Federalist Papers. They're getting this into newspapers all over the country. They're fighting to get states to pass the Constitution, and they get it. And they get it in 1788. They get it, and the Constitution becomes law. And of course, George Washington is elected president unanimously in 1789, unanimously elected. And he, again, is in that unique position to be president of the United States because he didn't grab power. He never became king. Okay. So Washington as president, you're the first president of the United States. Imagine that. People take the United States for granted now. Maybe fewer and fewer because of the way things are going. You begin to think 250 years later, maybe we don't make it. I don't know. That's up to you and me. That's up to us. That's what the LaRouche Organization is all about, is making sure that we have a as brighter next 250 years. But here's George Washington. He's the first president of the United States. Everything he does is going to be scrutinized. Everything he does sets the basis for what this nation will become. That's what's on his mind. Absolutely amazing, awesome responsibility on his shoulders. And what he does is one of the first things he does is he takes a tour. He goes north, he goes south, he goes to visit every state in the Union except Rhode Island, because they haven't, I believe it's Rhode Island, they haven't signed on to accept the Constitution yet. So he meticulously avoids them. Anyway, but he goes on a tour. He goes to get to know the nation, and again, constantly thinking about manufacturing, scientific agriculture, internal improvements, canals, not just canals for the development of Virginia. He's not a backward Virginian who's only interested in his colony, Virginia. He's interested in the development of the whole nation. He's an American patriot. So he does that. Now, inside his administration, there is a huge brawl going on. And you see it most clearly between Hamilton and Jefferson, but it's, Knox is his Secretary of War. Knox is a patriot. Knox is a nationalist. Hamilton is a nationalist. Knox and Hamilton played a huge role in the American Revolution. They actually put their lives on the line, right? They were shot at. James Monroe also, same thing. Madison was not. Thomas Jefferson was not. I'm not saying that Madison and, I don't know about Jefferson, but I'm not saying Madison didn't play an essential role. But I just want to make the point that the people that put their physical lives on the line and also saw the lack of a unified federal government to successfully win this revolution. I mean, they won the revolution despite that, but it was definitely etched in their minds that this did not function to have these squabbling states. You had to have a strong federal government. And so Hamilton, this bastard son from the Caribbean, who has no noble background, no nothing, but his mind. And Washington recognizes his great genius in finance, but in other things. Hamilton becomes his Treasury Secretary. And Hamilton, of course, throughout the whole Revolution, was thinking about how to create a banking system. And Morris, Robert Morris also, but Morris, when Washington was thinking about making Morris the Treasury Secretary, he said, no, there's another man who is even greater on this question than I am, and that's Alexander Hamilton. That's the one that you want. So he makes Hamilton the Treasury Secretary, and Hamilton comes up with an entire system of credit, of national banking. Now, he's got to, the United States is in tremendous debt from the American Revolution. Do they walk away from it? No, they don't. Hamilton argues if we walk away from that debt that we owe to our own people, the debt that we owe to other nations in Europe who loaned us money for the revolution, if we walk away from that, we won't exist. We won't be respected in the world. We have to pay that debt. But how do we pay that debt? Can we pay that debt just by going and taxing people more, squeezing a bit more out of them? No. we have to build a physical economy. We have to build a manufacturing-based economy. We've got to increase the tax base in the nation. So he creates a fund, and they create credit for investment in internal improvements in manufacturing, et cetera. And he says the most efficient way to do that is with a national bank. Article 1, Section 8, the Congress has the right to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to coin money and regulate the value thereof. What better institution than a national bank to do that? Jefferson, Randolph, in the Washington administration, they say, no, that's unconstitutional. You don't have the power to do that. It doesn't say it in the Constitution. It doesn't those words aren't in there. Hamilton says, yeah, but there's a clause in there, the necessary and proper clause. Anything that's necessary and proper to carry out the functions of the Constitution shouldn't be prohibited. Why would they be prohibited? Well, because it's not written in there. Well, that's absurd. And of course, the fundamental problem is that what's underlying the whole attack on Hamilton is a damned lie by these Confederates, because they want their slave system, period. And Washington, by this time, probably has already realized he's going to free his slaves. You can argue he should have done that earlier. I would argue he should have done that earlier. But he also doesn't know, he's dealing with this backwardness in the South, and he knows this backwardness in the South. And so he's dealing with, how do I keep this country together? And at the same time, extinguish this evil and develop the nation. It's not so simple. So he sides with Hamilton. He asks them to make their arguments back and forth. Hamilton writes a paper. Jefferson writes documents against it. Washington sides with the national bank. They say, oh, he's an idiot. Hamilton manipulated him. You know, this is really disgusting. I mean, Washington may not have had a huge formal education, but did he understand that the United States needed credit, that the United States needed manufacturing? I think we see from earlier, he absolutely does. He absolutely does. He's not an idiot. He's not a fool. He's not played. He understands. And he's the first president of the United States. And that's what we're founded on, is that concept that Hamilton lays out. So I wanted to make that point about this question of Hamilton versus Jefferson, and that Washington was clearly with this Hamiltonian thing. So people who think they love George Washington and hate Hamilton, they don't know who George Washington is. And they need to find out who he is and why he was right. And why he was right. Okay, so I'm going to go on there. There is our first national bank, 1791. Beautiful building in Philadelphia. It's still there. You can go visit it. And at the same time, I just wanted to make a point back at home. Washington this is Oliver Evans, who develops a fully automated grist mill, and George Washington builds this. He has him build a grist mill in his in Mount Vernon, and just for fun, we went down there and we visited it. I just want to show you. Can I get this to go?
No, you can't.
I can't.
No,
it's a video.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, it's a video, and it shows how there's a water wheel working, and the whole thing is is mechanized, and it's amazing, and it's using machine power, right? So this is in a sense, this is how you're going to get rid of slavery, is by bringing in machine power and having machines do the work that humans would do. And this is critical because the South languishes under this horrific slave system. It doesn't really get developed until Franklin Roosevelt and the Tennessee Valley Authority. I mean, there's attempts later on, and we're going to talk about presidents like Grant and others, Lincoln, of course, and Grant, who attempt to develop the South and bring it out of the the dark ages. But so let's go on. So Washington, I mean, there's so much more in his presidency, but I want to just get at a point here, which is that, again, after 2 terms, 8 years as president, he decides he's not going to run for a 3rd term. There was no constitutional amendment at the time that said he couldn't run for a 3rd term, but he felt that the nation was established at that point enough that he didn't need to be there as a person, that we would survive, that he could hand over power to the next elected president, in this case, John Adams, who was a much lesser man than George Washington, unfortunately. But in his farewell address, there's a number of quotes in here that I just wanted to bring out. He says in his farewell address, under the concept of remaining united, he says, quote, "The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations." Upholding the Constitution. "The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. But the Constitution which at any time exists, until changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all." So you can't what was this thing that Andrew Jackson fought against later, ironically, but they were trying to, where a state basically vetoed a law, and they say, no, you can't do that. The Constitution is the law. Beware of party politics. They are, quote, "They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitions, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government." Parties, political parties. That's what he's talking about. They will be potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. And I remember Lyndon LaRouche's 90th birthday speech, which everybody should go back and watch. I think it's up on the LaRouche Organization website. I think we played it on a Sunday, where he says the party system must end. Washington would agree. It never should have started, according to Washington. And that's the problem with the Federalists and the Republicans later that take off this whole battle that goes on. Valuing education. Promote, then, as an object of primary importance, institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge. Very important to have an educated citizenry. Cherish public credit. As an important source of strength and security, cherish public credit. That's what he says. Avoid foreign entanglement. Observe good faith and justice towards all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. And he talks about the pitfalls of permanent alliances, permanent rivalries, which we're constantly being pushed into now. It doesn't seem to matter which president is in the White House. We have hopes that President Trump will go forward with the peace that he promised, but there are certainly people around him that don't want that and intend to block that at every course and manipulate things to their war policy. So that's what I wanted to present about this great man, George Washington. He died 3 years later, unfortunately. I think had he lived, things could have gone differently, because he certainly would have had a hand in things, a say in things. But they only gave him that amount of time with us, and thank God that he was given to us for the length of time that we had him, because he was able to fight the revolution that won our independence, create the Constitution that founded our nation, and set the nation forth in the right direction. So I'll end there.
Great. Bob.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple critical points that I think are critical points. Because, I mean, what was, I think, really good, what Chris went through, is the mission of the nation. You know, the mission of the United States. And of course, that later on is kind of, you know, honed down to the preamble of the Constitution. We have a mission to ourselves and our posterity to develop a, you know, as the Chinese would say, livelihood of the people, government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's the mission. And of course, Washington's entire life is that mission. So if you have that mission, then you can take all of these kind of disparate, crazy, sometimes elements and move them historically to make that happen. And the revolution is just filled with that stuff. There's all sorts of, you know, internecine fighting and the Continental Congress and conspiracies against Washington, and it bothers him. There's some things that bother him, but he's able to put people to like a chorus, like a choral conductor. He's able to conduct a great symphony with these people based on that mission. Just one quick example is Saratoga, which turned the entire Tibet war around. You know, Schuyler was the head of the Northern Department. Everybody hated him. The New Englander, the egalitarian New Englanders all hated him because he was this Dutch patrician and blah, 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 blah. Right? Well, if he would have stayed as the head of the Northern Department when the Burgoyne invasion came down from Canada, nobody in New England was going to go there and be part of it. So what does Washington do? He says, dude, you got to get out. You know, not that you're a bad person, but we're going to put somebody else. He puts Gates in. Is Gates a great general? Absolutely not, as we see later in the South. But Gates, in New England, the Massachusetts guys love him. They love him in the Congress. You know, he's respected as a military guy. And he brings in Arnold from Connecticut, Benedict Arnold, and a couple more people, Benjamin Lincoln and others. And that combination completely changed the whole geometry of the, you know, of the strategic picture in the Northern Department. Because once the British came down and Arnold said, hey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, everybody came in. So by the time of the end of the battle, there was tens of, you know, thousands of militiamen that all came in to join in the fray of capturing the first British army in the history of the world. We did that. But it was because of that. And Washington wasn't even there. He's down getting his butt kicked in Brandywine, and Germantown wasn't so bad, but, you know, losing Philadelphia. And yet we have this victory up in Saratoga, which completely shifts the whole thing. The French come in, etc. So I just want to make that point, because the presidency is the same thing. That's the issue of the presidency. If there's a mission for the nation, you can put together, you know, that famous book, The Team of Rivals with Lincoln. You know, that's what you can do and move things in the direction of history. So anyway, we'll see this more as we get into the series. We'll see this with Lincoln, Quincy Adams, FDR. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Well, I just want to add that I think that's a really important point right now, because the nation is so confused. People voted last November against Biden, against perpetual war, largely against the genocide in Gaza, although everyone wasn't that clear, against funding Ukraine, against a war with Russia. They hoped for something to address the dozen, and hoped that President Trump would deliver on these things. And what you see is that the Trump presidency is buffeted about. He says one thing one day, something else the next day. He does one thing one day, he does something else the next day. And we have this assassination attempts against the president. We have threats of assassination against the president, like what James Comey put on the beach, 8647. There seems to be no penalty for that. He's finally been indicted, but it wasn't for that. Then we have the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We have mass shootings all over the place. The price of gas at the pump has not gone down at all. If anything, it's gone up a little. It's impossible to buy a house for young people or people on an average income. Things are very difficult for the average American, and somehow this Israel-Palestine war seems to be continuing. There's a peace plan now. It's not clear where that will go. We thought we had cut off weapons to Ukraine, but now we're sending long-range missiles and giving them American codes, or doing the targeting for them, which is what I think actually this means. So what do you do, and how do you sort all this out? There's a zillion theories about how was Charlie Kirk assassinated? Was it the 22-year-old kid? Was it someone in the front row? Was it an exploding microphone? Everyone gets very agitated. There's a big push, rightly so, to reopen the 9/11 investigation. What happened? Were the buildings demolished? Who did it? Why? You can, and I'm not trying to downplay the necessity of getting to the bottom of some of these things, but unless you have a forward mission, you have no way to pull people together so that we can all chase every lead on these horrible things that have occurred. But the question is, to what end? Where are we going as a nation? And our good friend John Segerson, who was on the symposium a couple weeks ago, said, well, why aren't we celebrating the next 250 years of our republic? Why don't we consider what's happened over these 250 years and consider the next 250 years? Where should we be? I've been saying for several years that the United States, frankly, by now should have had well over 1 billion people. We don't have that. We will one day soon. Do we have the electricity? Do we have the water management? Do we have science educators, a healthcare system, a school system? I was thinking, Chris, about what you said about abolishing that, developing a machine-based economy would make slavery also obsolete. Not just the evil of putting a human being in bondage, but it is very inefficient. And some people get very offended. They're very worried about, for example, AI taking jobs or robotics. Human beings should not be doing physical labor. Our unique gift is between our ears. It's our mind. It's our ability to discover, to be creative. If we can get enough machines and robots functioning so that we don't need to work 8-hour days, that people can work 4 hours a day, and one person working a week, 20 hours a week, can generate an income that supports a family of 5 or 6 people on one paycheck, that's a good thing, because the other parts of the time you're going to be reading Homer, you're going to be writing poetry, you're going to be studying fusion, you're going to be studying the galaxy, the space system. Maybe you're going to be teaching someone else. There is a great deal of work to still be done. There is so little that we actually know about the universe, that the less that human beings are required to be engaged in physical labor and can be engaged in creative mental labor, the act of discovery, the better for the development of the planet and mankind.
Yep.
And I think one thing that's so important about the United States, which is still a little bit the case, although they tried very, very hard to suppress the work and the genius of Lyndon LaRouche, but the insistence that every human being is equal and that they become an elected official, a representative, because of the consent of the governed. there is space for people who are brilliant to be able to rise, to dedicate their talents for the general welfare, dedicate their talent for the nation. In an oligarchical system or a caste society, you could have a young genius that just lives their life. Nobody knows it. They have no opportunity to contribute it. And I think what we're going to see as we study these leaders, and we should include Martin Luther King among them and Lyndon LaRouche, neither of whom became president, but who were absolutely presidential in their effect. That is possible in a republic, that someone can lead, someone can make breakthroughs that are absorbed, assimilated by the society and make a contribution, unlike in an oligarchical system where that simply is not allowed or possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Two things that I was thinking about in response to what you're saying. One is, and this was in this is really brought out in Tony Chaikin's volume 2. This question of the slave system, slave economy, because we have this funny thing where people say they're opposed to slavery, they hate slavery, but then they say slavery built the nation. Now, it doesn't make any sense because it's an evil system. It's not a good system. It's a terrible economic system. Now, there's some funny stories about Washington, because in Mount Vernon, Washington was extremely hands-on on his different farms, right? He would do a circuit with his horse every day of the entire acreage of Mount Vernon, and there were a lot of different farms there, a lot of different things going on. And he would get out and he would see slaves not working hard, and he would say, "I don't understand why they're not working hard. I want, you know." He'd get out there and he would work. This is how you should do it. You know, we want to get this done. You know, and of course the irony is, what benefit to the slaves is there to getting it done? You know, there's no benefit to the slave. They're gonna be working like that for the rest of their miserable short lives, or maybe longer lives under Washington, because he did take care to get them medical care and things like that. I mean, he was more humanitarian towards his slaves. Still a horrible slave system, and very, very inefficient. It didn't work, and he recognized that it didn't work also. I mean, that's the interesting thing, that he recognized this doesn't work. You know, we got to get out of this. We have to change this. And secondly, on this question of the mind, there's this amazing story in the winter of '76, when Washington is still up in Boston, and there's this slave girl named Phyllis Wheatley, who, as far as I understand, was a slave at the time, and her masters recognized that she was a brilliant person. She was a brilliant mind, and they got her a classical education, Greek, Latin, you know, and she became an amazing poet, as people may know, and you can read her poetry. And she wrote a poem, an ode to George Washington, the General George Washington. And he's in the middle of trying to keep his army together, because even now, I'll make one other point just on this, just an aside. All these people want to leave after a year, after a few months, after whatever. I got to get home. I got to get home. You know, I've done my year. I've done my service, right? There's Washington. When he leaves in '75 for Mount Vernon, he doesn't see Mount Vernon again until Christmas Day, 1783. He doesn't see it again. So he's there through the whole war. He's there through every bitter cold winter in Morristown. Even worse, when, you know, the worst winters were in Morristown. He's there through the whole thing. Anyway, just one point on that. He walked the walk, and there's no way that his soldiers didn't see that, and they really, really grew to love him and respect him. Anyway, So he's in the middle of trying to keep his army together in the winter of 1776. Phyllis Wheatley sends this poem to him. He writes her back and apologizes to her for not getting back to her sooner, and says, this is a beautiful poem. You know, essentially it must come from a great person. And he signs it, your humble servant, George Washington. So that's really something, you know, that people who want to paint him in a certain black and white way, I don't think you can do it. So anyway. And it's the point also that, to your point, Diane, that if people are allowed to develop, everybody has genius in them, every single person, regardless of their stupid skin color. I mean, skin color is the most ephemeral thing in the world. It's your mind. It's what's in between your ears, as you said. And the idea of this nation is that every single person on the planet has the right to develop their mind. And that's what we have to fight for.
Bob, did you have something?
Well, yeah, I got one. I can't hold myself back. I have to tell you, it takes a minute, the story of the Purple Heart, because it's so George Washington. So Washington was really pissed off at the Continental Congress because they wouldn't let him promote non-commissioned officers or promote his own generals. He couldn't do that. They had to go through all this and that, so he created something called the Badge of Military Merit. And this is in 1782 when he's in Newburgh. And the army was in what's called New Windsor Cantonment up there. You can go visit it. And he set up what they did is they basically, he wanted to give this medal, Badge of Merit, it wasn't really medal, but to soldiers that non-commissioned officers, these were sergeants, privates, and corporals who performed amazing things during the Revolution. And they built this whole building. It's called the Temple of Virtue. And in the Temple of Virtue, they had a book called the Book of Virtue. And if you got this Badge of Military Merit, you know, you were put into this Book of Virtue, which is now it's lost somehow. You know, we lost it historically. And so that's what he did. He really wanted to make sure that these men got recognized. And this later on the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth in 1932, was resurrected as the Purple Heart, but this time for men and women that were wounded in battle. So that's Washington. You know, he absolutely, and the men knew that. These boys, they weren't even men, you know, which is why they stuck around even when many of them weren't getting paid. Anyway, so I had to throw that in there because that's George Washington.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. I think it's time to wrap up. And I would urge people to spend some time on the LaRouche Organization website, particularly the Sunday programs. It's now Sunday, right, Bob?
Yeah, it's Sunday at 7 p.m.
At 7 p.m., you can watch some of the speeches of Lyndon LaRouche, who is probably the greatest genius that our republic produced, and for that reason vilified, slandered, smeared. I'll say, just as an addendum, we have heard that apparently Kash Patel has decided to sever the bond between the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith and the FBI because the ADL had put Charlie Kirk on one of their extremist whatever lists. And I am proud to say that Lyndon LaRouche was one of the very first targets of the Anti-Defamation League years ago for being anti-Semitic, for proposing a peace plan for the Middle East, a two-state greening the desert economic development solution, and frankly also for his work in New York City to unite people that various agencies, including the ADL and FBI, were seeking to divide and pit at each other's throats. So I'm glad the Anti-Defamation League has been, sorry about to sneeze, I'm allergic to it, I guess, has been so discredited. And we really have to work on getting LaRouche's name cleared, because the fact that millions of Americans are not aware of his work, particularly his economic policies and programs and development packages and maps for the whole republic, will hinder our prosperity over the next 250 years, which is what we're working on. So I'd like to thank both of you for joining. And what's happening next, Bob? It won't be next week, but who's our
John
next?
Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
This is the 200th anniversary of the administration of John Quincy Adams, starting in 1825. So.
Great. And the Erie Canal, I might add. Okay.
Right.
200th anniversary of the Erie Canal.
Right.
Yep.
And we should include Monroe in that as well, because they're a team.
Right.
In a funny way.
Great. Okay. So we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.